بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما. اللهم لا سهل إلا ما جعلته سهلا وأنت تجعل الحزن إذا شئت سهلا. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. Inshallah ta'ala, we are continuing in our reading of the book Al-Maqasid for the great Imam An-Nawawi rahimahullah ta'ala. And as a reminder, let us establish the sincere intention that we're going to learn what we can learn today with the intention of at-taqarrub ilallah, drawing close to Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala, seeking the reward of Allah and the acceptance of Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala, and ultimately seeking Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala. Before we begin, I want us to keep in mind that we are muqallidun. Muqallidun. Oops. I put a lot, but there's a reason. So all of us are muqallidun. That is, followers of qualified legal jurists, meaning mujtahid scholars. Can we copy that? All of us fit in this category. And there is a reason why I want to emphasize this. So can we all put that up, inshallah ta'ala? Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar. So, as being muqallidun, that means that we are not mujtahidun. We are not qualified legal jurists or mujtahid scholars. Hence, that means when it comes to legal rulings in the sacred law, the Sharia, we adhere to the legal deductions based on the primary sources of Islamic law of the qualified legal jurists, mujtahid scholars, mujtahidun. The scholars, they say, this muqallid, the legal ruling from a mujtahid scholar in relation to him has the same value as a text from the Quran or the Sunnah or consensus to the mujtahid scholar. In other words, just as the mujtahid scholar is bound to adhere to those verses that are explicit in the Quran and the Sunnah and the scholarly consensus, likewise, the muqallid is bound to follow the legal deductions from those sources by the mujtahid scholar. So, how do we do that? By following one of the four madhahib, schools of thought, of those mujtahid scholars that have reached us with an unbroken chain of narration. Because all of our religious knowledge, as I mentioned yesterday, must reach us with an unbroken chain. And the only schools or madhabs from mujtahid scholars that reached us to this day with an unbroken chain are the Hanafi school, the Maliki school, the Shafi'i school, and the Hanbali school. So as muqallidun, we're obligated to follow one of them. With that being said, in each of those schools, there are levels of legal jurists. And each level has a specific function what they're qualified to do. Not every level has the same legal capacity. So basically, there are four levels, and they're defined or categorized differently in each school, but basically there are four. There is the level of the absolute mujtahid, who deduces all of the legal rulings based on his own methodology from the primary sources of Islamic law. That's one level. Mujtahid al-mutlaq, the absolute mujtahid. Then under that, you have the mujtahid, who's a mujtahid, who is a qualified legal jurist, scholar, but he follows the methodology of that mujtahid mutlaq. So he's al-mujtahid al-muqayyid. Al-muqayyid, he's in that next level. Then you have that mujtahid who may be qualified to do legal opinions in cases that come up that the mujtahid mutlaq imam did not deal with, and they're based on his methodology. So he's a mujtahid in masail, in different cases, with the methodology of that mujtahid mutlaq. And under that, you have the mujtahid who's qualified to weigh the various legal opinions within a school in terms of strength and weakness. So he is the mujtahid who's qualified to do a tarjih. He's going to weigh the various positions at each level of within a school. There's going to be at the different levels of scholarship and the different mujtahidun scholars at each level. He's going to weigh all their opinions. This is like Imam al-Nawawi and Imam al-Rafi'i in the Shafi'i school. So as you can see, our author, Imam An-Nawawi, is not at the highest levels of the mujtahid within the Shafi'i school. Why am I mentioning this? Because as we learn as muqallidun, we are learning from summarized books of the sacred law. So Al-Maqasid is just dealing with one section in a summarized version of Al-Ibadat, acts of worship. So this book doesn't cover the whole spectrum of the sacred law. That will come later in future books. So what we're learning here is a legal primer, as I could say it. We're being trained to have a legal mind in terms of our religious practices. All of these rulings that we're learning have additional details, but we're at the first stage of learning. Because I never want us to assume, which I think is very dangerous, that what we're learning is all that needs to be learned on the subject, because it's not. It's a stage of learning within the subject, which we need to learn well, just the cases, so that when we go to the next level of our studies, we have a foundation to build upon. So this is foundational knowledge in the science of al-fiqh. Because yesterday, I was listening to the class about al-kufr, and I was very concerned. And what is my concern? That none of you are judges. None of us are judges. Be careful to not, at a beginner stage, walk around like you're a qadi, like you're a mufti. And I seen it happen. So be careful. Don't do that. Know a rule for safety on your part to advise someone to go to legal jurists to get more details. Don't make legal rulings. We're not qualified. Is this point clear? If that's not emphasized, you're looking for a disaster. We are not qualified legal jurists to give legal rulings, especially rulings that tell someone whether they're a Muslim or not. We're not qualified at all. We haven't studied enough. We don't know enough. We haven't read enough. We haven't heard enough to make such legal rulings. Please don't do that. Whenever you feel that someone has contradicted the sacred law in any way, point them to the cases that you've learned, and then point them to legal jurists who have knowledge of the details of that matter. Don't you make the legal ruling. You're not qualified. You cannot study a summarized book and make legal rulings that a judge would have to make. You're not qualified. Don't do it. For your own safety, don't do it. Is this clear? There are a lot of rules that are not mentioned. There are a lot of cases that are not mentioned. There are a lot of details and qualifications and exceptions of exceptions that a legal jurist knows. The common person will not know that. So all of us should stay in our lane. Like, this is just a warning because I am, in a way, responsible for the platform, right? So I have to be cautious, right? And that's with all legal rulings, not just the issue of kufr is very serious. Giving it and falling into it, right? Declaring someone kafir is serious, just as serious as falling into kufr is serious. Both. You know what I mean? So be careful. Don't rush. Our teachers taught us that, and it's a serious issue, they said the mistake of considering Muslim as the mistake, excuse me, of considering a kafir as a Muslim by some probable cause or excuse me, they even go it further than that. Let me summarize it. A person's really a kafir, but because of some other cause, you give them the benefit of doubt of being a Muslim. That's less severe than not giving that to a Muslim and considering them kafir. So that person is a Muslim, and there are some reasons he did something that you may outwardly think is disbelief, but because of the possibility that it may not be, you don't judge him as kafir. That's safer than actually judging someone who is a kafir as a Muslim because of the same reason. So he actually committed kufr, but you say, I'm not sure, because of this, he may still be Muslim. And you judge them as a Muslim. That's not as severe as taking the Muslim by the same thing and judging him as a kafir. So I don't want you to go there. I've seen people learn these cases and they stay in doubt of their Islam, everything. They breathe, they think it's kufr. So don't go there. Right? That's just a warning. You need to learn. You need to learn the cases, no doubt about it. Right? However, remember, there is authority in Islam, and we're not it. Is this point clear? It's very important that you understand this. So just be careful. When you want to be a mufti, then learn, acquire the works that you need and the training and the authorization, and then you can be a mufti. But before that, don't do the mufti's job. Let the mufti do his job. All right. But that's in the serious matter. Let's go to lesser matters that are not so serious. Even with legal rulings, like we're learning, when we learn a ruling, relate the ruling as we learned it. Do not make it, when speaking with others, that that's the only legal ruling in that case. Because there are other scholars, mujtahid scholars, who may have a different legal position than the one you're quoting. And as common people, people have the right to follow any of those legal opinions. So, what is safe to say, which people don't, is this is the legal ruling according to the school of Ash-Shafi'i as we learned in this books. Do you follow? See, this Quran and Sunnah mentality, or this Muqtasar Mufti mentality, is dangerous for us. Listen, this is the legal position that I learned from my teachers in this book. This is safe. That is the case. We learned from the route of so-and-so in the book Al-Maqasid from Imam Nawawi, this ruling. Right? That's the ruling. That doesn't mean that this ruling is not qualified in another book, detailed in another book, exceptions in another book. Right? It can happen. So we want to train ourselves not to go crazy and fanatic with legal rulings that we don't fully encompass, right? As our teachers used to say, you know some things, but many things are hidden from you. Wow, put that up. You know some things, but many things are hidden from you. You know some things, but many things are hidden from you. And in our case, and I don't even say this with a slight of doubt, we know one thing and 10,000 things are hidden from us. We know one thing and 10,000 things are hidden from us. When I say hidden, I don't mean someone hid it from you. That's true too, but that's not what I mean. I mean you're unaware of them, right? So with that, we can all stay humble and in our lanes, and we won't feel bad. We trained ourselves. Listen, this is what I learned. This is what is in this book. We learned from this scholar, this detail we learned. And when the scholar gave us, inshallah, we know where they get it from later. We know if there was, we build in our knowledge. But if we're going to fix our system, we all got to stay in our places to the best of our abilities. Right? We have to. Because this is an ocean. of Islamic knowledge. Right? And the more you learn, the more you're going to discover how much you don't know. Let's put that up too. The more you learn, the more you will discover how much you don't know. The more you learn, the more you will discover how much you don't know. That's general in life, right? But especially in Islamic knowledge, the more you learn, the more you will discover how much you don't know. Right? This is a natural thing. And this stuff is common sense, right? It's common sense. But sometimes in our eagerness to be learned, we forget common sense. Let me show you something. What we do, right? These in the Shafi'i school, right, are small texts from beginning to intermediate level, right? What we do as a training is we go from beginning to end and keep reading back. And we do that to train ourselves to keep legal rulings and their stages in our minds, which keeps reminding you that there's more to it, right? And then we read up to a bigger book and then go back over this process over and over and over and over and over again. When we get to the end of the series, we start over again and go again and again and again, right? So we got these little books, right? Right? So, for instance, Risal Jamia, The Incompetence in Epistle, Safinat al-Najah, right? Art of Salvation, Muqtasar al-Saghir, right? Which was a small summary. We do Al-Maqasid, the one we did. Al-Muqaddimat al-Hadramiyya, which is a major, the big summary. After that little one, Mabah Fadl, Matan Abi Suja'a, Umdat al-Salik, right? And we read some other books after those, right? But these are just small ones that you can just, like pocket versions, right? If you haven't read all those books just in the Shafi'i school and mastered them, you're not qualified to talk much, right? That's just in one school. And every school has this type of format, right? If you haven't read all those books and studied them with a teacher and understood the cases, you still a novice, let alone to give legal judgments. You don't. If you can't tell me the cases in those books, you're not qualified to be issuing legal verdicts. At best, you should be quoting, at best. And realize that I'm just saying what was said, not that I actually understand the full case. This was relaying, that's it. You're conveying, that's it. Don't make legal rulings. This is mentioned here. To some of our teachers, and it used to, in the beginning, kind of frustrate us, but as we developed, we really appreciated it. They would never answer us except from a text, right? They would say, you ask a question, they would say, so and so mentioned in this book, in this section, here's the text. But these were masters. That's the difference. So it wasn't no vague stuff. Imam al-Nawawi mentioned Al-Maqasid in this section. Ba' Fadl mentioned in Mukhtasar al-Saghir in this section. Ba' Fadl mentioned in Al-Muqaddimat al-Hadramiyya in this section. Ahmad ibn Naqib al-Misri mentioned in Umdat al-Salik in this section. Right, like that. Imam al-Nawawi mentioned in Minhaj or in Al-Rawda or in Al-Majmu'ah in this section. That's scholarship. That's mastery. They weren't interested in showing how much they know. They weren't concerned about that. They wanted to make sure the legal ruling was correct. You follow? But the old saying, "Faqidu shay la yu'ti," the one who doesn't have such knowledge can't do it, cannot give it. But we should know that it exists. And we cannot afford to do it another way. It doesn't work for us. Our sacred law will become a mess. I don't know why I extended on this, because I want it to be emphasized that, listen, don't make these mistakes, please. Right? If we're going to preserve generations, I'm sorry, I didn't even get to the text. But this is important because I was very concerned. I was listening I was reading questions, I was looking, I was hearing, and I was like, oh my God, this is going to be a mess, right? If we don't put everything in perspective. I've been around long enough to know us, right? You know, I've been around long enough to know us. And I'm very observant of what is not good for our religious health. And it's not knowledge, it's how we understand knowledge. Subhanallah. So let's take, inshallah, page 21, and let's read the section on al-istinja quickly. Bismillah. Al-Fatiha to the soul of Imam al-Nawawi, rahimahullah. Fatiha. Rita, are you there?
I am. Sorry. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah. The author, may Allah Ta'ala have mercy on him, said, going to the lavatory. 2.15. It is obligatory to clean oneself of every impure substance, per reliance of the traveler, coming from one's front or rear, though not from gas. It is sunnah to do so with a stone, followed by water.
Stone or anything that meets the conditions of the stone, right? So the stone or anything that meets in its conditions. We'll talk about that, like toilet paper, for instance.
Water alone suffices, or 3 stones if these entirely remove the filth from the place, provided they fulfill the conditions, per translator mentioned next, that permit one not to use water.
So here, those 3 pieces of tissue or toilet paper can take the place of stones. Go ahead.
Per reliance of the traveler, anything, per translator, such as...
Now, what you will notice in this book, you're going to notice it is written as you would learn with a teacher. So, for instance, he'll mention the case, and then in parentheses, he'll put R, which means he's quoting a text, Umdatu Salik, Reliance of the Traveler. Or he put that little N, that's the translator himself explaining, right? So what you're going to have is my comments, and you should, in your notes, know this is what Imam Amin said. The text, this is what the text said. The commentary on the text, that's what the commentary said. What commentary? What book? What scholar? The translator, that's what the translator said. When you make notes, get in the habit of knowing where what came from what. A good student won't quote, because we're only quoting, we're only narrating from other than the proper source. So whenever you make your notes, get in the habit to know where it came from.
Per reliance of the traveler, anything per translator, such as tissue paper.
So here you got reliance of the traveler. Reliance of the traveler mentions nothing about toilet paper or tissue paper. That's the translator, right? So you should be able to, and the cases that are mentioned in there are not mentioned in Al-Maqasid, right? So those cases that are being mentioned in Maqasid is only the small section here, right? So those cases now, he's quoting from Umdatu Salik. That's not in Al-Maqasid. So even though when you read, you say, I read in Al-Maqasid, say I read in the English translation of Maqasid, that was quoting from Reliance of the Traveler. It's not the actual Al-Maqasid. It is Umdatu Salik, right? And when you get into checking, sometimes when you're in this habit, you're going to notice that sometimes the quoting is not accurate. When you go check the original text, that's not what was said. Sometimes, I'm not saying in this case. So the good student is one who has the ability to distinguish sayings and verify sayings from their original sources. To distinguish sayings and then verify those sayings from their original sources. It's very important. Go ahead.
Per reliance of the traveler, anything per translator, such as tissue paper, can take the place of stones that is a solid, pure, removes the filth, and is not something that deserves respect or is worthy of veneration, nor is something that is edible, these being 5 conditions for the validity of using stones or something else to clean oneself of filth without having to follow it by washing with water.
So just take those 5 conditions. The thing that you use, anything that meets these conditions is valid as dry purification without having to use water. So that thing must be solid. That thing must be pure. It's not affected with najis. We talked about najis things. It removes, it's uplifting, uprooting. It removes the filth. So it's not something that's smooth, right? And it is not something that is respectable. Like you can't use religious material paper to do that with, right? And it is not something that is edible. So when all those 5 conditions are met, toilet paper, for instance, meets that, you can use it.
Cleaning oneself with a dry substance means to remove the filth so that nothing remains but a trace that could not be removed unless one were to use water. And when this has been done, any remaining effects of filth that could have only been removed with water are excusable.
So it is najasa there, but it's excusable when one does the proper form of istinja, right? So whatever removes that bulk of the najasa, if 3 wipes don't do it, you need to do more, right? But the minimum is 3 wipes.
But it is obligatory to wash oneself with water if, number 1, One has washed away the filth with a liquid other than water or with something impure. Number two, one has become soiled with filth from a separate source. Number three,
Like if the water from the toilet splashes on one, then one must use water.
number three, one's waste has moved from where it exited, reaching another part of one's person than the place by the aperture where it settled after exiting or has dried.
Mm.
Number four, or if feces has spread beyond the inner buttocks, meaning that which is enfolded when standing, or urine moved beyond the head of the male organ, per translator, or for a woman, reach the vaginal introitus. Though if
Mm.
they do not pass beyond them, stones suffice.
Mm. And,
2.16.
and whenever you see stones, because the stones were used for that purpose, um, so whatever meets that condition, even if you don't use, in the earlier days, they used to use stones for that. Mm.
2.16. Purblives of the traveler. It is offensive to use the right hand to clean oneself of filth. It
Mm.
is unlawful to urinate, per reliance of the traveler, or defecate with front or rear towards the direction of prayer, Qibla, when outdoors, per reliance of the traveler, and there is no barrier to screen one, though this is permissible, when outdoors or in, within a meter and a half of a barrier at least 32 centimeters high, or in a hole that deep. When one is not this close to such a barrier, it is not permissible except in a lavatory, where, if the walls are farther from one than the maximal distance or are shorter than the minimal height, relieving oneself with front or rear towards the direction of prayer is permissible, though
So the bathroom, which is established for that, is an exception in this rule. Mm.
it is offensive to relieve oneself into still water under fruit trees on paths, in the shade, per translator, i.e., where people gather or talk, into holes, per translator, or while standing, from reliance of the traveler, which is offensive unless there is an excuse, such as when standing is less likely to spatter urine on one's clothes than sitting, or when sitting is a hardship. It is offensive to speak when relieving oneself.
وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. الله 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 الله. Uh, so let me say this, inshallah. So tomorrow, please read. So we read that. And in all these cases, we're going to come back in later books in more details. And I may add more details as we're talking, but I want you to concentrate on understanding the text itself with some little explanation. And then, as I said, as we go on, because that process that I took you, we're going to go through the same process, just in English. So, this same process that I showed you in Arabic, we're going to go through this same thing in English. So, 1, 2, we covered. We're on number 3. So, we're on number 3. We did this, we did that, we're on this. Then we have 1, 2, 3, 4 more books in our English reading that we're going to do. And then we'll get into the bigger books, right? And that's going to be a process that we always have going on the platform. Let me say this, as I see some of us, when I talk about these, no buying books this week. There's no need. We're good. We need to concentrate on this book, right? Um, uh, when I say what I'm saying about this, it's not for us to feel sad. We never properly learned in general. All of us are in the same boat. especially in our African American community. Especially. We're developing, and that development is going to continue. I'm talking to you how do I say this? From a backstage pass. Does that make sense? I'm talking to you about the show from backstage passes. I know what's going on. You're just looking at the show and it just looks nice. You don't see everything involved with that show that's going on behind the stage. I'm behind the stage. I know what's going on. Right? Does that make any sense? That doesn't make sense? Or you just hating? Which one? What do I mean? I see things that in our study that I realize a lot of times we don't know, and that's why we're getting the results we're getting, because certain things are being hidden from us. As if this is the real story, and that's not what's really happening. Something else is happening, but they ain't telling us, right? Yeah, it's a magic show too. Right? A lot of trickery going on, right? So don't get don't get discouraged. Just realize that, alhamdulillah, we're getting access that we didn't get before. I'll give you an example. And since Akil Fahad is here, he'll tell you, right? When you do research, when you study, like historic stuff, you have one narrative that's been told to you. The more you research, you're going to realize that sometimes that's a false narrative. And when you discover that, naturally, especially if someone told you a false narrative, you're going to feel something. But the challenge for the researcher, for the learner, is to realize that was at one stage, and now I'm at another stage, and I'm learning things at this stage that wasn't necessarily given to me at this stage. But that's the stages of learning and the stages of life and the stages of research. Learning has its rewards. Research has its rewards. Developing has its rewards. Right? Parenting at 20 years old or 25 years old is not the same as parenting at 50. At 50, you look back when you were 25 and be like, I had a lot to learn. Right? So a lot of us who raise children, and you have differences between them, like distance, you won't do what your new children, the younger ones, what you did with the first ones, because you learned some things, right? I remember with my first boy, I remember my wife, everything had to be right. The second boy, not the same, right? Not the same. Things that were thought to be needed for the first child, after experience, realize you don't got to do all that. And the second child is different, right? So I'm giving that analogy the same way with learning. What you're learning at this stage, as we continue, you're going to look at it different at the next stage. You're going to have different insights, different, knowledge. So at one time, the guy who comes and says, I'm on the Quran and Sunnah, sound impressive. Now, when you hear that, it almost may sound blasphemous. What do I mean? It almost may sound blasphemous. What he's doing with it, right? At one point, it sounded like, man, I'm on the hawk. I know Quran and Sunnah. As you learn that same statement, you be like, uh-oh, what are you doing? Right? 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 What are you getting ready to do? You're not qualified to read Quran and Sunnah on your own. You need to follow a mujtahid scholar. Stop making legal rulings. You're going to make a disaster. But at one time, that was like, man, somebody come with Sahih Bukhari and giving judgments. You like, man, that guy is reading the hadith of the Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And now you're like, hey, well, put that down. What are you doing? Because you learned. If anyone goes back in the day, like 40 years ago, if a person was reading Bukhari, he was like the sheikh of the sheikhs. He has Sahih Bukhari. And he's reading it and saying in the hadith it say this, and in the hadith it say this, and we was fascinated. Today we like, what are you doing? You can't do that. You see my point? Because you learn. And at a stage, when you get another stage, you're going to look back today and say, Dad, we was trying, but man, whoo, that's the nature of learning. Do you follow my point? Now is it clear what I'm saying? So don't look at it. I didn't know all these things. Yeah, I know. That's why you continue learning. Right? Yesterday, I learned something. Right? It didn't change my rulings, but it gave me information that I wouldn't even imagined. And it sparked my curiosity. Right? What some mujtahid scholars had said about certain cases that went against the four imams, but they were mujtahid scholars who held those positions. I said, wow, that's deep. So even though it was agreement among the four schools, other mujtahid scholars had different rulings in that case. And then the mufti may at times, in certain circumstances, mention those cases because of the certain particular special situation, which is the job of the mufti. Subhanallah. But this information was written in a book in the 5th century. In the 5th century, this major scholars wrote about this issue. But we may not know these things, right? Because we don't got that kind of research. We don't even have access to the material to even know. So if someone don't tell you, you're not going to know because you're not that good of a researcher anyway. Nor do you know how to research and what are the formats and what are the things you need to research and what do you need to look for and what are the scholars, who are the mujtahid scholars, who were the scholars, mujtahid scholars other than the four imams, what would they learn, what reached us from their words, all that stuff people need to know when you're at that level, not when we're at our level, right? Our level, muqallid, we just follow. Y'all follow me? Is everything I said clear, not ambiguous? If you have any questions, please ask. Don't leave and you didn't understand what I'm saying. I told Sheikh Samir one time, he asked me, why do you teach like that? And I explained to him that my people have already been told that they are scholars. So they approach Islamic studies as if they are scholars without scholarly qualifications. So you have to show them what scholarly qualifications are to teach us the basics. Because if we think we scholars, we're not going to learn the basics. I'm not following no madhab. Where's your dalil, Ak? You don't even know what a dalil is. But never mind. Right. There's no dalil in that book. You don't even know what dalil is. So first I got to show you detailed dalils, proofs, and evidences to bring you back down to just read a basic text where you should have been in the beginning. Right? That's how it works. So it's all right, we clear. Any questions before we close out? Today is Friday. Tonight, Sheikh Walid Rifai will continue in his stories of the prophets, alayhimus salatu wassalam. If there's no questions, we'll stop. Okay, barakallahu bikum. May Allah reward you. And please, for tomorrow, we have to read the next section, right? So do your reading. So from page 23 to 25, please read ahead, inshallah. From page 23 to 25. Wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Barakallahu bikum. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.